Welcome back to another demo. Today I'm going to focus on coalesce function. So I'm going to start by asking you if you remember is null or f null function in the context of Excel and Tableau, or NVL function in Oracle. If yes, then you already know what coalesce function does or what the concept of a coalesce is. So coalesce is very useful when you're performing query against a table that contains null values, right? So what coalesce does is it's going to ignore those null values, right, and substitute it with another value that we provided as an argument here. And it's very important, especially when you have uh, columns in a data set that contains null values. Otherwise, you're going to run into a problem where you're performing a query or calculation, and that one null value can ruin a lot of things for that one for that specific data point that you're looking at. So sometimes it's actually not sometimes always important to consider that a column or a field has null values, or to make sure it doesn't have it. If it hasn't, it's a good practice to use one of these null functions that would allow you to ignore the null values and instead substitute it with a value that you would like, uh, that especially with a value that's numeric, so that it does not affect the other columns that are in calculation or query. I'm going to start by providing you the a coalesce function against a set of values, right? And then I'm going to move on to the table and show you how you can achieve the goal of the achieve the functionality while you're performing query against a table. So, and when you're performing it against a value, right? This is more conceptual here. You're saying select, coalesce, and you're saying the first value in your set is a null value, this is empty value. The next one is say 5, right? When you run this select query, you're going to see that you're getting 5. And what happens is uh, the coalesce function helped you ignore this null, right? And you got the 5. So you're getting the next argument after null that's actually a value. So the argument you're getting the next value after the null that has actual value to it. So that's pretty much what it does when you're performing against one a select argument, as we just did it here. But when we're doing it, when we're deploying it against a table, as I said, it's very, very useful, very effective, because it helps you contain null values and then substitute them with another value that you would like. I went ahead and created a table called the trade balance. It has ID, which is an integer. It doesn't allow null value. A country character field, exports integer field, imports integer field, and my primary key will be my ID constraint. And I went ahead and run this. I'm not going to rerun it because I already have the table here. Trade balance, so the name trade balance. And then I inserted all of these values into it, right? Countries and their exports and imports. So let's go ahead and take a look at this table, right? So we have ID, country, exports, and imports. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform a quick calculation to attain the trade balance for these countries. Trade balance pretty much can be extracted by uh, by subtracting imports from exports. So for those of you who don't know trade balance, also known as the balance of trade, is the difference between a country's export and its imports. So again, it can be easily calculated by subtracting the total imports from the total exports. So if we get a value that's, let's say, as a result of value that's on the positive side, then we say we have a trade surplus, right, in economics. So if we have a negative, right, if meaning if the country's exports if the country's imports are exceed the exports, then we say it's a trade deficit, right? So let's go ahead and perform that very basic calculation here and to create a column here. And then using this example, I'm going to um, add clarity, right? What coalesce function does, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say select, right? And then I'm going to say bring me the ID, bring me the country. So this is the country. Bring me the exports, bring me the imports. And then also, right, I want you to, and then I also tell them that I want to calculate a subtraction by subtracting imports from exports, right? So I'm going to say exports minus import. And then that's it. And then I'm going to specify what table it's going to come from, which is trade balance. And I'm going to go ahead and perform this query. And you're going to see that I got all of the results, right? So here, as you can see, there are a lot of countries on the minus side. They have trade deficit, Afghanistan, China, US, and then I have two countries here that are on the positive side. That means they have trade surplus, which is 20, 35, and this table itself is just a fictitious data set, so don't depend on it. This is not a good measurement of trade, the balance of trade. I just plugged in some values in here, just conceptually to explain this example. So it's just a fictitious data set. So there's a problem here now, right? So we have the trade, we have the balance of trade, right? So just name this as balance of trade. We have the balance of trade, but there is a problem. Hold on, let me just move this to the right. What is the problem? The problem is that we have a couple of columns here that have null values, right? They have null values. Let's say that these countries actually let's say South Africa and Bangladesh actually imported nothing, right? They exported nothing. Like literally, they exported their export balance was zero, and then import was 85. And sometimes when we have a zero itself, as an interval has a meaning, but as a ratio, sometimes zero is absence of a number, right? It depends on how you see it. So null itself, could mean that there is a missing data. It can also sometimes means that depending on some systems that it's zero, right? And sometimes we just want to treat it as zero because we don't want to get a result that's null, if it makes sense to you. So again, uh, there's ratio and interval numbers, right? Where intervals has a meaningful in intervals, zero has a meaningful indication or implication, and ratios don't have meaningful. So if you say zero apple, that means there's actually no apple. That's absence of any apple. But if you say zero Fahrenheit, right, then you're actually talking, or if you're using zero for, to indicate those the thermometer, right? And if it goes down below zero, or if it's plus zero, then it has a meaning. So something being at a value point of zero does not mean that thing is zero. That means that zero itself has a meaning here. So therefore, let's just for a second either treat this that this export is zero, or at least in this case, we don't want to get a result that is null. Just because there's a one null value here on the record, if it's a long record, it's a long row of like a bunch 20, 30, 50 values, and we're performing a calculation just because of one null value, we don't want the result to be null. Does that make sense? Now, this is where we're going to use coalesce, right? Because we are saying, look, although there's a null, right? Although there's a null, but I want you to treat it as a zero. Does that make sense? Especially in numerical data, when you have a null, again, you're getting a result, as you can see here on my screen. Subtraction between import and export is null instead of it being 85. And this null could actually mean zero. Maybe it's a missing field, or maybe it's that the system itself changed zero to a missing value, and it does it sometimes. That's why it's very important to do data cleaning and data transformation, right? So the coalesce here is going to help you, right, by checking for null values and then substituting that null value with a different with another value, right? Now, since we have a null value on exports, we're going to add the coalesce function here. And we're going to say coalesce, right? Exports, and we're going to put a comma. We're going to pass two arguments. We're going to say 0. And then we're going to close this parentheses, and we're going to add one more parenthesis here. Why? Because we opened one for exports and then close it here. And then what else? Yep, minus that. So coalesce, yep, straight up balance minus imports. So open here, and then maybe open one more here so that you have this and then this, right? Let's go ahead and run this. Oops, I think I am supposed to put the coalesce here. Let's go ahead and run this. There you go. So now, as you can see on the table, we have 85 came up as minus 85. So South Africa is actually has, is all the way like, on the left. It's deep in its trade deficit, right? If they had zero export, let's say they had economic crisis and they exported literally nothing in terms of values of goods and services produced in their country. They had no production. If they did not have enough to sell to other countries, to export to other countries, and therefore they had zero export. Same thing with Bangladesh. Let's say uh, um, and I'm sorry that apparently I was in a hurry and I used 85 for all the imports. uh, Apparently Bangladesh had zero too, but they had import of 85. So that means Bangladesh was also in economic crisis where their value of goods and services that were produced in their country was zero, and they did not sold any goods or items or goods and services to other countries. Therefore zero. So therefore they got minus 85. So what Coalesce did here is it told exports column like, hey, look, you have no value. So what I want you to do is, right, I want you to substitute them with a 0, and therefore, if there's any calculation involved, when there's a numerical, when it's treating these null cells as 0, then your calculation, as you can see here, are now not null anymore. The result of your calculation is not null anymore. And I'm going to make sure that I fix this imports to some to various numbers instead of having uniform 85 across the entire column. All right, this is, I think, it. I hope that this has been helpful to you uh, to understand the coalesce function and the concept of nulls. I look forward to seeing you in my other videos. Thank you.